the universal adoption of this as a consumer technology and then bleeding into prosumer it exceeds anything I've ever experienced. And I think it will just fundamentally change people's sort of daily patterns.
This is all early adopters, and early adopters are very forgiving of mistakes on purpose. When something is brand new, a culture around it develops. The early internet people didn't complain that the internet was slow.
Right.
The more senior small teams that use AI are superhuman.
Yeah.
It's like they woke up and they were all f***ing Tony Stark. It is unbelievable.
Right.
And like their productivity is insane.
First, I just want to comment, you posted in the group chat that the news around autism updates your P-Doom.
Yes. It only works if you show the image, though.
Yeah,
So
tee it up on
you'll
the
have
screen.
to do the overlay to make that make sense. But there's so many memes you can do with that Fox News headline.
Yeah,
So
exactly. First, I want to get into the immigration news.
you really want to kick off just like really with the fun stuff.
Yeah,
Get the blood going.
exactly. Martin, you had some interesting
Martin,
reactions.
yeah, exactly. Perfect.
Please. What were your reactions to what you think of the policy?
Well, it's interesting because it seems like anytime the administration touches immigration, there's a huge outcry, knee-jerk outcry. And we saw a lot of that from VCs even. But it's also very interesting that Reed Hastings, who is a classic lefty, and has long been, was like, I've been doing policy for immigration for 30 years, and this is the right approach. And this is very much my thought, which is this system has been gamed for a very long time. It's very hard for startups to hire because of the lottery system. It's locked up by the large companies, the consultants, Amazon and Google. And like that has to change. And I think a very reasonable way to do it is to set price, because if you've got a market and you need to allocate supply, price is a great way to do it. So I'm very, very positive on it. I comment about that, and a lot of people seem to disagree. So I think it's an active discussion.
Well, I think there's a couple elements to this. So one is, first of all, Reed was ultimately responding to a thing that was no longer the actual policy.
Yeah.
So he said 100K a year was a great policy, and obviously the internet had moved on. It's not to me obvious. I wouldn't conclude the same outcome that you just concluded in that I think that you'd have a situation where the Amazons and Googles would probably actually capture the vast portion of the talent in this situation. So it's not clear to me that like startups sort of come out ahead or better off
let's
as
step back.
this, from this particular implementation.
Maybe Amazon and Google, who are probably more easy to regulate, but there are a number of organizations that are consultancies,
100%.
that actually are price sensitive,
Yes.
that would be squeezed by this. And I would think that, given that they're in the top 15, they make up like 4 or 5 of them. That would be a significant freeing up for a higher level.
I think my thing would be like if you could just get all the people in the room that have an opinion on this topic, and you actually have sort of the practitioners in tech in the room as well, and let's say the most kind of you can't even say like right wing, because actually I don't think this is even classic Republican. So it's just like the polls. If you got everybody in a room and he sort of say, what are we optimizing for? Yeah. Are we optimizing for? We don't want to have like wages go down. Okay, that's an interesting thing. Are we optimizing for a particular kind of job not going to, let's say, certain populations of Americans? Are we optimizing for just ensuring that we only have the highest merit people on the planet coming here? Like those are all totally different kind of goals to optimize for. And I think that the framework you end up with and the system that you end up with should probably, hopefully have like a cohesive sort of strategy behind it. My strategy would be we want the absolute best in the world here. Yep. There's not exactly clear that there's a fixed number on that. Some years there might be 5,000, some years there might be 50,000, some years there might be 80,000. Yep. We probably want them to be net positive to wages. Yep. So let's agree that like in any given industry or locale, wages should go up with this talent pool as opposed to down. So I think that's actually totally reasonable. And you should have the market kind of sort of some market dynamic to that, and you shouldn't be able to kind of game and exploit the talent pools for saying now in Detroit we can go wipe out IT jobs because we can go and offshore those. Like I think you could build a system that basically meets all of those goals while still ensuring that you can get somebody that goes to, their master's program and name your state school. They come out of it, they're an AI engineer. They're not yet at the sort of Meta is going to pay them $100 million. But they are going to be totally valuable contributors to our economy. It's all sort of positive sum. It's not taking a job from anybody else. It makes us more competitive. And I think there's a way to do that without sort of overly, let's say, putting constraints in the system that make it maybe so a startup wouldn't be able to, kind of economically viably participate in this. And I think 100K per year would be at a point where startups would be directly impacted.
Working with a lot of startups, I'm not sure that's
respectfully, the kind of startups that Andreessen Horowitz sees are not all of the base of startups in the world.
Before we fall into so you could quibble about the number. Is it
Yeah.
20K, which Keith Rabois said, which I thought was very sensible, or is it 100K? I don't know. But like the idea that you
Keith threw out 20.
He threw out 20.
Well, then let's just go with Keith's number. I think that if Keith threw out 20, I think we can be good with a Keith number.
But I think the number, it's easy to fixate on the number.
Yeah.
But the real you have to always look at what is the number replacing. And I don't think the average person having this debate, other than the people that really work at this, have any idea the amount of productivity that is lost working this system.
Yes.
I mean, the incredible amount of resources. And of course, the bigger companies, the ones that you mentioned, have enormous teams that spend all of their energy, like literally, essentially as lobbyists, working this system. And then the back end of that are all the justifications and all of the management, and all of the handling. And now they've just deployed all their resources to manage like in-house call centers to deal with getting their employees back to the United States to just deal with it. You hit on one point that I think is really important to this debate that is sort of getting lost, which is there's no doubt that within the big tech world that for the past 25 years or so, they really went on this sort of bifurcated curve, which is hiring, for the people in the office, focusing on, say, 25 or 30 university departments. And then basically everybody else was like, well, it's so much easier if we just hire huge numbers of people from these 8 international locations and schools. And I think a lot of this is missing that. A big part of this is like, well, the tech industry, like if you look at Intel and where they all went to college, and if you look at the history of Silicon Valley, it's all these people from all the schools in the middle of the country, none of which are like the target recruiting schools by the main tech companies these days. And that's been a place where I think that the big companies have been somewhat lazy. And as a person who spent decades flying to all of these schools and recruiting, there's work that the universities have not done to be better programs, and that there's work that the big companies have not done to be clear what it is why they've stopped recruiting or haven't seen the numbers. And that's a change would be better for everybody to really make.
I agree. So my expectation of what gets impacted is kind of an even different job set than that, which is if you go to like Florida today and you try and get like an IT job for 100K, you just can't, right? And so that I think is actually the area that's the most directly impacted by the large consultants.
Meaning there aren't jobs that pay 100K, or that you just can't find a job?
They're taken. They're all out there.
They're all taken.
They just don't exist. Like any sort of IT administrator, like the services, like the basic consulting gigs, like all of that has been saturated. It's very, very tough to get a job between like 80 and 120K in much of the United States because of this, right? And so this isn't about like a new grad being a software engineer, because the reality is the expected value of a software engineer over their lifetime is high enough that I think that like the market kind of navigates that. But it's almost these kind of, lower level, more like IT admin jobs that have been squeezed out. And listen, if we want to bring them back, then I do think, and we don't want to do this kind of arbitrage that a lot of these companies are doing, that we're going to have to change the pricing.
So, wouldn't a minimum salary band effectively solve that problem for you?
Sure. Yeah,
okay.
For sure. Yeah, I think there's a lot of mechanisms to do it.
Okay.
I actually agree with you. Like, we should actually talk about the problem that we're trying to solve. So I think we would all agree, if you come to the United States, you get a college degree, you should have a visa, right? Okay. So like, that's for sure.
Well, do we all agree on that?
Okay. Yes, I agree.
Okay. So I don't think that the people proposing this strategy actually agree on that.
Well, so Trump famously said this.
He famously said a lot of things, for sure.
And then he unsaid it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this wouldn't be an interesting debate if we all agree that and we have a policy that says if you go from IIT and then you come to Kansas, State,
then
but the
you get a
problem-
job,
but
and you can
but
say,
that
"Here,
became
we're
part
good.
that became part of the gamification of
Yeah.
the system, because you would do the IIT thing, then you would get a company sponsorship for a master's degree at some school. So it didn't really accomplish the goal of like investing in coming to the US the same way that going to a 4-year school would have done.
Wait, why is that? What was the problem?
Because
with
you
that?
ended up getting sponsored by a company,
Yeah.
and it changed the whole dynamic of like, were you seeking out the US, or did a company pull you to the US? It's a little bit different.
Okay.
But I also think so often this discussion goes the direction this one is going is we focus on like new grad software engineers, and I
Yeah.
actually don't think that is getting impacted.
Right.
I really don't. I really think it is like what do the consulting shops do? They do like
Yeah.
admin work, IT work, and it's just a different salary band.
Yeah, I think
these are
the
these are body shops,
Yeah.
and like an approach like this directly targets them. I think in a way that's actually quite positive.
Yeah, I just think there's. I would just then favor Keith's approach, because I think there is a number in which it becomes you're then making other trade-offs in your business just to be able to kind of pay for
The
this.
100K number is
Well, I do think
totally
that
agree with
that the dollars, but I do think that, just to reinforce this, that that the whole system can do without this immense cost and uncertainty.
Yep.
And any solution should really be, if you address that, then the rest of the dynamics will follow.
Yeah.
But as long as it's a huge, complicated, expensive system, then the big companies are going to continue to benefit from it disproportionately.
Yeah.
And I will tell you right now, like it is much harder for a startup to deal with the lottery system.
Yes,
than
it's
it would
impossible.
than it would be for them to pay 100K. Like at
Totally.
least for the startups. That
But I don't think it changed the lottery system. It's right.
Right. It didn't.
It's
That's part of
100K
the-
to participate in the lottery system.
Right.
Oh, no, I understand.
That-
I mean,
that's
hopefully,
Sure.
like a
Right.
number. It'll change the calculus of a lot of people that are in
Yeah.
the lottery system.
I just think
But
there's.
I would prefer to remove the lottery system. Again,
Yeah,
of
I
course,
think that you can absolutely pull off a system that for probably in a shared definition for us and anybody else would say this is clearly a high merit job. It's going to increase the wages in this particular sector on average, and we want to make sure that we've got the best talent in the world that comes in to do that. And it's not going to drive down wages. We probably want as many of those individuals here as possible. And so I think, some elements of this are intriguing in that they push the conversation forward on the dimension of, like the 100K is like a hammer to do that. And maybe there's a more nuanced approach that I would certainly prefer. But
again, it's important. Like the 100K will scale with the skill level, right? So the higher the skill, the more like that is amortized. And so you could argue that this is just kind of a dial to get higher skills.
Well, once you put a dollar amount on it, you have to keep in mind that people are going to pay it.
That's right. Yeah,
they're going to make up their own
it's an adaptive
mind,
market,
and the skill might not be relevant to some
no,
people
fair enough.
because and so that's the tricky part.
Yep.
I want to segue from labor markets to good opener.
what's the next really interesting political topic that we
Good one
can
about-
engage in?
Yeah, exactly. From labor markets to labor productivity with AI. Offline, Aaron, we were talking about the Meter paper, and the paper suggested that their developers were actually less productive with AI, but that doesn't square with your experience talking to a lot of different startups, seeing a lot of different startups, and how they're so much more productive. So why don't you talk about where you're seeing startups say they're more productive, and why is it happening?
Yeah. I'll first just represent our own case study, and then there's the really extreme version. So our own case study is we've adopted a few different kind of AI coding tools. Cursor being a super popular one internally, and as I talk to people, let's say in the hallway, who have, maybe they're trying to get me excited by AI, but like I think they know I'm bought in. So the kind of qualitative answers I get from people, and then I'll give you our internal metric. Some people say I'm getting a 20 to 30% productivity gain. Other people will say 75%. Interestingly, I have not been able to pinpoint the demographic difference on the answers.
Oh, but this is self-reporting.
This is self-reporting.
How happy are you?
No, but we have internal metrics as well. So about 30% of our code right now is coming from AI. So we've got
70%,
30%. So we have some of the kind of pure internal metrics that show this. But what's interesting is that like I have a 2x2 of I have senior people that are saying that they're getting 75% productivity. I have junior people that are saying they're getting 75%, and then vice versa. on the 25%, let's say. And I haven't been able to quite figure out a pattern, maybe except for, and we've talked about this a little bit, but you kind of see this online, except for maybe the biggest criteria is just the people that actually push the AI to do more, which is sort of this other new kind of psychographic, which is just like, who is willing to just be like, you know what, I'm going to YOLO this task and just see what the AI comes up with. And your sort of willingness to just do that, I think probably somewhat then shows up in the ultimate productivity gain. So that's us as a relatively larger company on the startup side. But what's crazy, and this is the thing that just blows my mind, I will regularly talk to 3, 5, 10-person startup founders that self-report they might be getting somewhere on the order of like 3 to 5 to 10x productivity improvements. And the big difference is that, you know, a year ago, if we were to have this conversation, the conversation would be about, you know, AI sort of doing type ahead, and it, you know, it can add maybe like a few lines of code to your productivity per, you know, incremental, you know, sort of unit of work that you give it. And then now obviously the big phenomenon is background agents, where I give it a very, you know, detailed prompt, I send it off, it comes back. You know, people talk about it as like a slot machine of like some percent of the time it's not going to come back with the right thing. You have to decide what you actually, you know, kind of pull in from it. But the kind of startups that are getting like real multiples of productivity gain are just, they're fundamentally engineering in a different way. They're sending off a task, the task goes off, comes back in 20 minutes, and then they're really in the business of doing code review, not code writing. And it's going to obviously change, you know, quite a bit of what computer science looks like in the future. And then the only question is like, you know, what are all the things that that's good for? Where does that break down? What kind of teams can actually evolve to that state? But that one has been blowing my mind the most recently. And I think that kind of fundamentally changes what the future of, you know, kind of engineering looks like.
I think what you said is super interesting. Let me ask you, I think that there's an overlay that goes beyond junior, senior, and which is we're all talking about characteristics that have a solution that has two really important characteristics right now. One is that it's engineers doing stuff for engineers, and they understand the domain super, super well.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a really, really important part and a really big thing that people aren't talking enough about, which is maybe what's going on is that you have AI accelerating for people that work in the domain and
Yes.
are very smart.
Yes.
And then the other is we shouldn't forget, and this is to your self-reporting a little bit, but also, which is that this is all early adopters, and early adopters are very forgiving of mistakes on purpose. And it's a super interesting dynamic where when something is brand new, a culture around it develops, which just lets anything happen. I mean, you know, like the early internet people didn't complain that the internet was slow.
Right.
The only people who complained the internet were slow were the late adopters who were like, wow, this is so much slower. And or like take online video, which was like, I'm watching this tiny postage stamp video, and the early adopters are like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. And everybody else is like, why would I want to watch anything like that? And the same with downloading music and so I really feel like what's going on is just this incredible.
Do you remember that you guys, do you remember this watch that you guys made?
The Spot watch?
Yeah, Spot watch.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
in like 2004, 3 or something.
Something.
So I bought one, and it used like
FM,
AM or
unused FM radio
unused,
white noise.
Yeah, so
you could get like stock clicks 45 minutes delayed if you were outdoors in a field.
Yes, and so I had one, and I was in this camp like, this is the coolest thing in the entire world. And obviously this is going to be the most mass market product of all time. And, you know, I was like 20 years too early with the Apple Watch.
No, turn-by-turn GPS. Like the first time you could put turn-by-turn GPS in your car, it was super cool, except for the fact that most cars moved faster than the ability for the computer in the car to calculate when you were going to turn. Right. And so you just drove around. It was like a U-turn machine. Right. But I think that it's so interesting because I think that people use the AI tools today and they assume like, well, I'm not a doctor. I don't know anything about being a doctor. Let me ask you to cure me.
Right.
And diagnose me. And it's like, whoa, that is the worst. And it just like all the people who see failure, like they weren't great programmers to begin with. Right. And they didn't know how to ask. They didn't want to review it. And whereas great programmers or just professional programmers know that code review is really important.
Yes.
And that's just how you do it.
I think there's an aspect, there's an aspect of this that makes it very difficult to measure. One of them is, and I don't think it's just an early adopter thing, like these these models are so magic that you get dazzled.
Oh,
So
yeah.
even if it's not what you want, you're like, it was great, And I think it's very easy to conflate that with being productive. Like, it's not what I wanted, but it was amazing. So therefore
I'm
it
doing
must
great.
Be, but no, seriously, therefore it must be great. So like maybe over time we just abdicate having an opinion and like the model does everything. But right now, and I see this a lot, people are like they're so enthusiastic about using AI, but it really hasn't impacted their output. They're just enthusiastic. The second one is I feel like there's almost shadow productivity.
Whoa, sorry. How would you verify that with a 5 or 10 person company who kind of empirically is operating at like a 50 to 100 person company? Like you can see the sheer scale of their code, and you're like, okay, you could not have done that 10 years ago.
I actually agree with everything
yeah,
Steve was saying, which is, so listen, this is anecdotally. Anecdotally, I work with a lot of companies. Anecdotally, the more senior small teams that use AI are superhuman.
Yeah.
It's like they woke up
Right.
and they were all fucking Tony Stark, and it's
Right.
unbelievable.
Right.
And like their productivity is insane, but they're
Yes.
all super senior.
And and look, I don't want to take anything at all away, but those companies were also incredibly productive relative to a 10-person team at a
100%.
big company.
Yes.
Because there's no code, and they're
yeah.
starting from a clean slate.
No,
and
they really wake up. Yeah, for sure. And like, they're very senior, but they're also almost to a person where AI skeptics to begin with and are incredibly sober about the value. And so like they just use it in these very pragmatic ways.
There's one other category that I'm seeing, because I just want to be intellectually honest on the full spectrum. I'm seeing these 19 and 20-year-olds that are like, first of all, I don't know what is in the water at like Stanford, MIT, et cetera right now, but like everybody's dropping out. So like just like literally like people are going there for like a week just to drop out. But there is a tendency of that cohort. It's the 996 people. And there is this tendency, which is, they would have been maybe 10x engineers in a prior world, but now they're like 100x engineers.
Yeah.
And so, senior in terms of in their own kind of relative cohort. Yeah. But like the way that they are building their startups are just like completely different than it's probably if I look at so we dropped out of college, God, that's scary, 19 years ago. If I look at how these companies run versus today, it's the biggest change in how you start and run a company that I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And like, and I think if you looked at like in 1995, if you were to drop out of college, versus 2005 when we dropped out of college, I don't think like the company building process was all that different.
The internet fundamentally changed.
No, post-internet.
Okay.
So you're
you have
building.
you have to rewind to the internet because that was a
100%. We're not in 85. So at 95, you're dropping out to do an internet startup. Okay, you drop out to do an internet startup. By 2005, other than the fact that our resources were in the cloud versus you'd have to go to a data center. In our case, we actually still went to the data center. Yeah. Like not that much about the company building process was different. Today in 2025. Everything about how you're starting your company is completely different because of AI.
I think that the key, the through line in all that is velocity.
Yes, exactly.
And I think that cutoff, the internet increased velocity.
Yes.
And AI increases velocity
I totally agree.
the same way. And I think that's just super, super important to what's going on.
So we're
because
basically,
if you go back, even in the early internet, like when you started a company, there was still a lot of old school, like, what's your business plan? What's your plan? We're going to be stealth for 2 years. There was all of the stuff. And it was really Mark and Ben at Netscape that changed the velocity of how companies work. And the cloud was an accelerant to that acceleration of velocity. And AI is a refactoring of how velocity works.
Yeah, but what was interesting is even in the cloud, like that was this great virtualizer of the physical stuff you would have to deal with.
But that was a 2-year build out.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, like you had no, you could have customers.
Yeah, 100%.
As soon as you had code, you could have customers.
You're right.
Which is like,
PLG and a lot of these kind of high velocity startups actually started pre-AI. But the pretty like phenomenal. Like think about like GitHub, think about like Slack, think about like Figma.
Yes.
Like you have some pretty remarkable companies that came pre-AI that are drafting on it, and a lot of that was like basically cloud and then this acidification and then unlocking kind of different routes to go to market.
Yeah,
Zoom was a great early example.
This is the thing that AI is an accelerant in building the product.
Yes.
Whereas what
running
SaaS
and
and the cloud did was accelerate getting paid, which was a thing that used to take 2 or 3 years.
I mean, I would arguably the cloud also made it much quicker to build a product because you would have like these big.
Well, it made it much quicker for customers to all have the same one.
I don't think it made it like 5 times faster.
Fair enough.
So like I think it was like like you can see your website a lot quicker, but like I could see a website in 98 pretty quickly. Like,
Yeah, but well,
So-
yeah, maybe this is an infrastructure thing. Building a big distributed service.
No, no,
It's
sure,
just-
sure,
it's
sure.
just
I
really,
was not
really,
doing distributed
really hard.
infrastructure in '98.
so
Yeah. So there's sorry, I just want so I think AI productivity is hard to measure for two reasons. The first one I just mentioned is it's just really dazzling. So I think like people kind of they're like, oh, it's amazing. The second one is I think a lot of the productivity is actually hidden and people measure the wrong thing, right? So
Shocking that people measure the wrong thing in
That's right.
productivity.
That's right.
Literally the history of productivity measurement.
Well, but also what happens here is like you have the board, and the board is like, we need more AI, and then so what happens? And they go to like some CTO or some innovations lab, and then the innovations lab do AI, and so like whatever they like bring in like build some internal tool, and it'll fail. Of course that'll fail, right? But the reality is like this AI wave is so personal. Like probably most people in the company are using ChatGPT. Probably there is some personal assistant, probably, they're using Cursor or some coding thing. And that's much, much harder to measure
right.
just because, it's not advertised. And so if you actually look at the reports on like enterprise things fail, you guys look at like what they're measuring. And it's like, clearly some internal project pushed down by the board where they hired like, some consultant to do it is going to fail. Those always fail, but that's actually not what's going on. Like the movement that's happening is a very secular movement.
This is the next time that bottom up adoption is really changing the productivity equation.
Yeah.
And that's a thing that it defies. Big companies do not know how to deal with that because they need to control it. They worry about safety and security and privacy and all of their corporate rules. And then also the other thing I think to overlay on that is AI is a very unique, if that's not a bad way to say things, innovation in that it's like non-deterministic.
Yeah,
And so all of a sudden you have this very personal and non-deterministic thing, which the real problem in a large organization to all these pilots and AI projects is that you can't not just measure, but you don't even want to put out there a non-deterministic solution because your whole thing is like, well, we operate at scale and we have 60 countries.
Yeah, like
and
the white blood cells.
Like we can't put like a customer support solution out there if 5 agents in 5 languages all have different answers based on the way that the customer or the CS agent asked the question. And I really feel like that is going to be the hugest challenge in large organizations figuring out how to adopt things is like they're going to just get all bunched up over non-determinism.
Yes. Yeah, I think that we will have to have some new form of measurement probably in general on this because so much of the improvement in productivity will sort of be this like subtle change of like I used to go to Google for that.
No,
and
now my EA is writing emails using ChatGPT for me.
And
like,
so
I'm sure that's
where is that showing up
in?
And other than just like again when we talked about this in I think the last podcast of just like we're gonna just start to do higher levels of work, and that will just end up looking different. But you won't be able to be like, okay, how do I measure what the productivity was when it's just like I'm working just totally differently.
But I mean, code I think is such a great example. So, like, what do people? In my experience, the more senior folks actually use AI for code. It's like documentation, writing, testing. I mean, it's a lot of the other stuff that may not actually like increase like the shipping schedule, but like you get a lot more robust code, a lot more maintainable code, a much better architecture, a much better future forward architecture. So we could be building tremendously better software, but still be shipping features at the same velocity. Right?
We might need to just measure like quality of life as another metric of
like literally. I'm just happier. I don't have to do stupid
developers
shit.
don't want to write document exactly.
Right. But this is I it's so easy to get accused of hyperbole and overstating it and things. But what I think is just so key to what's going on is this it is what you were talking about, which is like the whole notion of what you're going to do with the job is going to be really different. This is my obligatory super old person thing, but the pre spreadsheet, post spreadsheet is a perfect example of this. The pre
classic
spreadsheet
example.
I didn't say classic. I said perfect. But before spreadsheets, you would be a banker, and you would be like, I'm supposed to help this company get acquired, and you would come up with a financial model, and you'd have 50 recent MBAs all churning away with their HP calculators, figuring out the financial model. And then you go like, okay, let's do this again. But if the interest rate changes or if their source of funds change, and you're like, okay, well, that's like a week. And everybody has to do it all over again. So your quality of decision was really bad.
Yes.
And so what happened was that
That's
just
interesting.
in 1985, like that job just completely changed. And by 1990, instead of asking the recent grads do it, you were doing it yourself. I actually remember this absolutely crystal clear. My two cousins were University of Chicago MBA grads in 1985. They did not use a computer when they got their MBAs. And when I was talking to them about going to Microsoft 2 years later, they were like, well, we have these kids who use the computer for us. And they ended up using computers and stuff. But like their whole notion of banking was defined by this multi-week turnaround. And then all of a sudden it's just more interns doing their Lotus 1, 2, 3 thing. And it gets to the, what's going on with code and startups is it's just there's just like a whole different mindset over how much you can do and how soon and iterate. Figma and Dylan, they're always talking about this.
Yes.
Like this is like Figma is going to now change the trajectory of a design idea to go from like, oh, let's iterate over here to like, let's just do it.
Yes, I mean this is where it's like a weird thing to like think about the percentage of my productivity as an example, and like my day is like not representative obviously because I'm bouncing between too many different things. But like there'll be so many times where it's 10 p.m. In a prior world, I would have sent off a task to somebody, some analyst or chief of staff, type role. Go research this thing. It comes back 3 days later, and then you find the answer. And then now it's obviously just like kick off a deep research, go to Cursor to generate a prototype, do some kind of analysis, and then you have it back in 10 minutes or 20 minutes. And I've just compressed whatever that was kind of then going to be as a serially connected to that task is now just fully compressed. And so then by the morning you're now kicking off whatever that project was. Again, like nearly impossible for me to peg like what is that as a number. It's just like a fundamentally different thing on just what work looks like, and because you just compress so many different steps of a workflow into a single action. And so it's just like a completely different way of thinking about work.
Where does that fit in for you in what we were talking about, what I was asking about earlier, which is how does your expertise really contribute to that?
Yeah.
And in particular, I think it'd be interesting for people to understand, like when you talk to customers, how do you help them to avoid trying to get people to make them do jobs they couldn't do in the first place? And like because that's an easy point of failure.
I mean, it actually is, this is this really counterintuitive thing where, and you've talked about specialization on the last one, is like the biggest gains of AI go to people who have some degree of expertise in an area to know what is actually true, what is not going to work, what should I integrate from the output of this AI. Like what are the 2% of things that maybe are hallucinations or took the data in the wrong direction? If you don't have a deep understanding of your particular space or field or domain, you aren't able to then have the right judgment to make all of those decisions. So I think the experts just get more powerful in this world. And so that's why I'm not even like convinced that you can tell a college student to learn anything different than any other, period in history. Like be really good at a particular field. Yeah. And then AI is merely a turbocharger of your capability in that particular field. But like, if I didn't just like generally know the things I know about, SaaS, which is like obviously like a really like weird expertise. But like, I'm like, okay at understanding SaaS. Then the things I give to, a deep research agent that I then go and incorporate back into work wouldn't make sense. Like to me, I wouldn't have all the context for like that one thing that it mentioned. How do I like form that into the overall strategy? But because I have some understanding of this particular industry, that just makes me way more productive. So I don't think expertise goes away at all. And I think any of the experts in their particular area just become more powerful.
So we actually have a fair bit of anecdotal market data on this. So it's very, very interesting. So if you take like a lot of these, let's just take kind of a non-text example, like image or video. And if you look at the customer base for any of the popular platforms, very interesting. So if you draw $1 at random that's monetized, it's from a professional. And for obvious reasons, because, they can produce. If you draw a user at random, it's casual and it's in the tail.
Right.
And so it's fairly clear that this is a prosumer movement from monetization. And, I'm associated with a number of companies that work with, like, say, professional designers or professional creatives. They spend just as much time on the AI tools as they would on traditional tools.
Yeah.
It just turns out the output is far more rich. And it tends to be,
They have
they
a
produce more
taste
content.
but
It's still human taste. There's still like very specific requirements. And so I think if there ever is an ads model that ever shows up for AI, I think that there's going to be a long tail of people that want to use AI, but they actually don't have the financial incentive to do it, or it isn't tied to, like, their actual job. And we're already starting to see that bifurcate out, and there's going to be another subsection that do. And my sense is, let's say I'm writing, like, whatever, I'm a casual developer and I'm writing a 3D game, and I want to have, like, a 3D asset. I've got one of two choices. I can have AI create it for me, or I can contract a professional to do it. Like, me as a developer, I'm not going to create, even if I use AI, it's not going to be a great 3D asset, right? Yeah. And so I think that, you're going to have that same line that you have today. Is either you can hack something up yourself, or you can go with a professional, and the professional will be using AI.
And I think what's super exciting is that AI has created a third category, which is I'm not trying to do this as a job. I'm never going to monetize this, but there's some product utility gain to me that is worth $20 a month. So my ability to now generate prototypes when I'm by myself just brainstorming, like, again, I'm not going to do anything in the ultimate delivery of that, into any functional code, but it's worth $20 for me to be able to go and, like, realize the thing that I'm thinking about. Yeah. And so there's just, like, all new ways of capturing TAM, because there's all this utility that gets unlocked.
Right. And there's one more thing that's worth noting, which is people that are interested in an area get there through AI right now. It's like, this is the number one opportunity for somebody, that wants to enter an area to do it as an AI native, right? Because the tool actually can teach you, and then there's just such a paucity of talent out there that you can fill.
And this is also, this is the history of productivity in general, which is, the more tools that you have available, first the experts use them, and then more people are able to become experts. And but that's part of your managing your own career. I love that point you made about, like, you still have to be really good at something. And I think that if you want to be good at finance or at sales, you should become really good at it and assume you're going to use AI for that. And you're going to be better than the people pretending. And I think that very much like, if you just take, we were going back and forth about, it makes a PowerPoint slide deck. Well, it turns out to make a good PowerPoint deck is still a skill. Yeah. And people still pay McKinsey huge amounts of money for better PowerPoint decks with better pictures.
Yeah. So listen, I contract a lot of work for, like, videos and art, and I have for a very long time, as part of, like, different companies, or even here at A16Z, I have seen the shift for contracting someone that uses traditional techniques to AI. Dollar amounts are the same. Right? And so, again, like, this is Jevons paradox all over again. Like, they spend just as much time. It's just the output tends to be more dazzling, or whatever it is.
And so you should see more versions of it. They should run more simulations and other ideas.
Right. You've got more iteration with them. You've got more control. Like, I can have a video where, like, and I want a dragon to fly out of the sky, so, like, you have, like, a lot more control as the customer. But for sure, this is not somehow, like, dropping the cost of output.
Were you about to jump in? I want to circle back to a point you made earlier about that there are 20-year-olds who are building companies in new ways. Because remember a few years ago, I think Patrick Carlson and a few others were asking, hey, where are all the Gen Z super successful founders? Remember that? And of course, there was Dylan Field and Alexander Wang, but their companies took a few years to really work. But now, we're seeing the Cursor founders, the Mercor founders sort of, get to massive scale in a very short period of time. And maybe it was the foundation model companies required, a certain level of, experienced founder because of the fundraising amounts, and maybe the applications are, more conducive to younger founders. But what's your sort of reflection on this?
Well, I don't remember exactly the date at which he mentioned that, but I do think there was a period between in the sort of mid 2010s to early 2020s where we were actually in kind of a bit of a lull as an industry, and the reason for that was like we kind of did, like, check off a lot of boxes of, like, the core things that people needed in the world. And so we, like, checked off, like, a lot of the, like, once you have Slack, you don't need 5 other chat tools. Once you have Zoom, you don't need 5 other video conferencing tools. And so it gets kind of derivative, past these kind of core platforms. And so once you had, like, SaaS, kind of check off all the major, like, things you do at work, And then in the consumer world, we had ways of delivering food and listening to music and watching videos. So like there's like not an infinite set of things that we do as consumers. Then what is the 20-year-old founder supposed to work on? Like it's like you have pretty finite opportunities as compared to in the mid 2000s, let's say, the whole world was open. You could start anything. And because every single category had to be reinvented kind of post mobile, post, kind of cloud maturity. So we now have that era in AI. And that is why I'm like so unbelievably pumped up. And it's because you have a complete reset of the landscape where there's incumbent advantage in distribution, but that is it. There's no other real advantage.
Well, there's a bunch of
incumbent has.
disadvantages.
Yes, and then there's a bunch of disadvantages.
But I
So-
think, go ahead. Sorry.
No. But like, I mean, you know where I'm going. So so you have the exact makings of a landscape where new startups can come in and do things that incumbents either can't, or there's no obvious incumbent to even do that thing, because again, you're taking maybe like services and turning them into AI labor, and there was no software incumbent previously to even attempt to do that. And then you have incumbents that have a whole lot of complexity in terms of their ability to go and execute in some of these spaces, and they're not going to retool their entire internal engineering workflows to move at 10x the pace. And so a brand new startup can go and do that and then instantly get the scale of a larger company. So it's the first time in history where you have none of the disadvantages of a big company. And the traditional advantage you have as a big company is you have scale and you have distribution. Scale because you can look at a feature and you say, we're going to go build that next month. And obviously it's harder because there's like, there's just lots of complexity to that, but at least you have the human, power to go do that. Now as a startup, you instantly have scale because, background agents, et cetera. And so then it's a distribution game. And a lot of these, pieces of software can go viral now in a way that wasn't possible 10 or 15 years ago. So we've kind of neutralized a lot of the incumbent advantages. And so thus it's a ripe opportunity for brand new startups. Often will be people just like coming right out of college saying, hey, it's my first time building a company. Like they're crazy enough to not know how hard it is. So they'll jump right into markets that otherwise we would assume are like, the market's already solved for. There's no way that you're going to build a company, and you'll just have new startups that actually go and do it and actually produce real companies in these spaces.
Yeah, because I mean, this is just so critical because what's really happening is this is why it's an actual platform shift. So Silicon Valley has seen this movie many times before, and that's why often there's a lot of this. Is this crying wolf or not? Because everybody knows that when there's a platform shift, that's the moment in time that startups are at an advantage.
Yes.
And so each time there's a platform shift, like everybody's like, oh, this is it. This is going to reinvent everything. And then it doesn't. And people get really like, oh, it's always incumbents. But historically, like the advantages to incumbents are wildly overestimated.
Mm-hmm.
And really, I mean, this is this one where, did the internet undo Microsoft or not undo Microsoft is a super interesting thing. Because, of course, there's a $3 trillion company now, but not on the internet in a way that you think about the internet. Like none of the consumers, none of the platforms, none of the assets that we had in the 90s became internet assets.
Yes.
I mean, even if you look at Azure today, it's an amazing accomplishment. It's not running Windows anywhere.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's why it's not crazy to go, wow, is this going to be good or bad for Google? Because there's a bunch of stuff that becomes really, really difficult if you don't make the transition. And then it turns out historically, even if you do make the transition, you really didn't, and you just have to wait for time to pass.
Well,
this is like Intel with the GPU.
Yes.
Like they missed the GPU in 2005.
Right.
And they missed the opportunity to buy the company, to do the work or whatever. And they kind of missed the data center too. It just took a longer time to figure out that they missed that as well.
Well, and we have a pretty narrow definition of like disruption in the sense of like we expect that the incumbent has to lose for this new startup,
and
so
that never happens.
It never happens, and it's the whole radio, TV, theater, movie analogy.
Exactly,
And it's like no, like it turns out that Microsoft can be a $4 trillion company, and you can have all these new categories emerge that maybe Microsoft should have owned if everything was like perfectly analogous to the desktop days, but they just don't, and it all works together as one sort of ecosystem because it just turns out like software did eat the world, and these markets are actually just like 100 times larger than what we realized, and so incumbents can grow, and then you have new disruptors that sort of emerge along the way.
Yeah, anytime you bring in a new technology that brings the marginal cost down, then like the market's going to expand, and like the incumbents can do it. I will say incumbents are very bad bad when new user behaviors and buying behaviors show up, like
Yep.
in particular,
Yeah, yeah.
that they don't know how to cater to it. AI is definitely a new user behavior and
Yeah.
a new buying behavior. And so this is very much an advantage of startups, just because, to change a large company around a new user behavior cuts to the entire company, everything from basically marketing all the way to support in the back end. That's just too much of a lift.
I mean, if you look at the best practices of like even how you would create an agent in the last 18 months, I think we've gone through 2 to 3 architecture pattern changes.
Yeah.
And so like, it's just like, I can
exactly,
barely keep up
yeah.
as a, mid-sized company. I can't imagine if you just had
Yeah, I
so
mean,
many more people you
yeah.
had to like organize around that.
Disruptive new technologies require people to understand how to use them in consumption in different ways. That evolves over time as you get best practices. Like that sort of flexibility can only come. It's actually a very interesting question of how Microsoft actually did Copilot to begin with, because it was actually one of the first ones of these products was very successful. I learned recently it was created by OpenAI, so that kind of explains it.
Well, but you had that,
it was-
you had a startup
in
person, and and conveniently he was a startup guy.
Yeah.
So
100%.
like,
conveniently-
even then, by the way, it's
Well,
remarkable that it came out of Microsoft.
But
It's
what's
absolutely
always remarkable is when something new and defining comes from these big companies, basically skunkworks. Basically, they had nothing to lose,
Exactly.
and it didn't interfere. Like the
Didn't
iPod
interfere,
is this
right.
classic one. People, or the iPhone, even people always talk about like the brave. It's like their computer business was dead. Like it was like 3% share and going nowhere. So like it was like a Hail Mary. The iPod was a Hail Mary,
Right.
and then the phone, they weren't in the phone business.
Yeah,
it didn't
right.
matter, and the fact that they made a phone a little computer is what Nokia was like. Whoa, what is that? And I think people really need to wrap their heads around just the fact that, to your point, that the big companies stay around a very, very long time. And this is something I've seen a bunch of people in the past couple of weeks, it's basically Clay Christensen, Innovators Lemon. Of course, nobody's ever read the book. And Clay is a great guy. He was down the hall when I was teaching there. And the thing is that this is a book like about 2.5-inch disk drives and a bunch of really crazy
I really don't
industries.
think it applies to modern
But the thing that
software,
he missed, aside from he missed the cost and low high end and thing, but was also that the companies don't evaporate.
Mhm.
And your point
Right.
about that is really important. And so what it does is there's this shadow that everybody is worried about. And so you just see it constantly. Well, like I assume like you when a company is like, we're not worried about if Google does this, that's what you want to hear.
Right.
Because like, it's just, and you live this because you were like the classics, Steve Jobs said you're a feature.
Mhm.
And here, not just that you do, there's like 2 whole companies that do this stuff now.
Fortunately, he only said that to Drew. So,
Right.
so I
I
got the Gates version of that one. So,
Yeah.
But the one thing that is very timeless about Clay would be the thing that does transcend floppies or whatever the thing is the incumbent doesn't want to do something that's against their business model.
Of course,
that's working.
of course.
And that part is fully timeless.
Yep.
And to your point, it's actually very rare whenever we say these companies disrupted themselves. It's almost never the case that they disrupted themselves. It's the case that they went after a market that they had no actual market share in, and it just worked.
Which was the development tools for Microsoft.
Yeah.
Because like there was no business in Microsoft development tools anymore because
Right.
nobody was writing Windows programs. So really it was like, what could we do for the cloud? And
honestly, it's even a little bit of a silly discussion to do this with AI. Like AI is very disruptive, so we're like, okay, well then it allows startups to like work against incumbents. But even in non-disruptive technologies, startups often have a play against incumbents. So for example, every year, I'm an infrastructure investor. Every year for the last 10 years, after AWS reInvent, I move into therapist mode. And all of my founders, all of my founders,
They
call
launched
me,
us on,
and they're launching my open source. They're competing with it. It happens every single time, and I'm always like, you know what?
That's really
You'll
funny.
be fine. I can't think of one company AWS has ever put out of business by launching a service, and you know what? They've all been fine. And so, in some ways, even in like the normal like state of business without massive disruption, startups still have.
It was don't build a SQL server and compete with Oracle directly. And don't build a word processor. Those are
maybe
two
those
things
are the-
that were pretty evergreen for a long time.
Never do a spreadsheet. Like there's a few things that.
No, there are some categories where people should call us first.
Because
they won't change.
There's a far side that we should definitely show people that. It's a really, can I have 10 cents why do you want 10 cents for your startup? So I could buy a loaf of bread and beat you over the head with it for such a dumb idea. It's a good one.
We should have a call in on this thing, right?
Exactly. Oh yeah. Here's my startup. The thing though the other thing that I just don't think we've had, at least I don't know of a modern kind of case study for, is again this opening up of non-software TAM for software. So there's not even incumbents in the classic sense. The incumbents are really just professional services categories of work. And so it's really, for the first time ever, you're packaging up intelligence for a particular domain and workflow. And so there's no software company you're competing against for those dollars.
But it could be the vertical company, right? Like, you know, like you have to become an ag company.
But the vertical company will probably also be your customer, though.
Company.
But they're also your customer. So it's actually this amazing thing where the people you're probably disrupting on paper are actually the primary users of your technology.
That are actually take advantage.
Yes. And so then it's like there's really no inherent competition until you know eventually like more companies flood that space to do that idea.
So this plays out in practice. If you have a company, an AI company that goes after, say, like agriculture or construction, they end up like realizing the competitive set are agriculture and construction. The buyer knows how to price things like agriculture and construction. They end up becoming basically agriculture and construction companies, and then they end up doing exactly what you're saying, is selling to the agriculture. Because it's like, because they're not good at that, right?
There's a whole world. Exactly in fact, the earliest PC software was extremely vertical. Like if you actually look at the TRS-80 catalog from the early 1980s or late 1970s, it would be like, this is crop rotation software. like literally, like, okay, this is what you should do. Like, and the salesperson for Tandy would show up in Nebraska and sell crop rotation software. And then there was like, I run a dentist's office, and this is scheduling for a dentist's office. And what happened was, and this is what I think is going to happen, is these professional services organizations there are going to be some that are like computer savvy. And today they're really good at using existing. They're just going to go, you know what, we should just build like a company. And huge numbers of these verticals are just going to be existing pro serve that turn into
I think
software providers.
I think it's an incredible time where if let's just pretend that you just are committed to not building a software company, like you don't want to do that, or you don't maybe have the team to do that. So you're going to build like a real world company. It's an incredible time if you started from scratch with now AI as your foundation. If you wanted to be a new systems integrator, and your whole point is that we are a systems integrator, but we use Claude Code or we use Cognition or we use Cursor to get the output, you will have such an advantage over any incumbent, because the incumbent is not going to be able to rebuild that. So I've seen examples of people building new ad agencies. Because obviously, like if you can do literally $1 million ad video campaign for $5,000. Somewhere between those two numbers, you can charge the customer. So there's like this incredible time where you can just be building all new kinds of companies from the ground up, leveraging the breakthroughs that we've now seen in AI.
That was an early internet thing that did really happen, which is particularly in the advertising space. And I think it's going to happen in everything that's text and everything, which was, there were these digital native ad agencies that just knew how to use Flash. Right. And they would get bought for $1 billion.
The same thing happened with social, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. What did you think of this survey that was how many people use AI every week? I thought this was pretty interesting.
Yes. What was your Pew response?
Well, it turns out like the number of people, it's like up to 75% of adults are using it many times per week.
Yes.
And of course, you just see it when you use Google search. And it's all self-reported, so you don't really know. But it was pretty interesting because I pulled a 1999 Pew study on internet usage.
As you would.
As I would. Like basically in 1999, like half the country owned computers. And they were all online. Even 4 years post Netscape, it was like still half the country. And so you look at that as being slow or being fast.
Well, it's fast back then. I mean, that felt fast, actually.
Well, you have to spend $3,000.
The activation energy was buying a computer.
But still, if you discount the search AI, there's still activation energy to figure out what this new thing is. Nobody knows how to ask questions to a blank edit control, make me smart about something.
I think the universal adoption of this as a consumer technology and then bleeding into prosumer is it exceeds anything I've ever experienced. And I think it will just fundamentally change people's sort of daily patterns. Like my sister, not in tech at all, teacher, like she was in town and she was like, I was asking chat this question, and like I had to like do a double take. I was like chat, and I was like, oh, ChatGPT, that's what normal people call this. And it's just like it's completely pervasive as just a standard technology. And so that to me is just like, okay, we now have the conditions laid for the next phase, which is, and we've now seen this for a couple decades, which is consumer adoption now goes first. And then it gets basically pulled into the enterprise because you go to work and you're like, why can't I ask questions of my enterprise systems the way that I can everything else in the world? And why am I not getting that same level of productivity gain? And then you again have the kids coming out of college that like they only know how to do homework with ChatGPT. They come into the workforce and they're like, why would I spend 2 weeks writing this report when I just came out writing essays in an hour? Like obviously something has to kind of give on this. So this is just lays the foundation for why we're going to see just a massive upgrade cycle in the enterprise.
Also, to build on your point earlier, like about distribution, and the reason that distribution is not the advantage that it used to be is because it's already exists on 7 billion phones.
Yeah.
And so at every other platform shift, there was an upside to getting new distribution that didn't exist before. But you had to overcome that. Like you had to get like the internet to people who didn't have the internet before. You had to get SaaS to people who didn't have. Now everybody has all of the ingredients right now.
Anytime your business strategy relies on Comcast showing up in a neighborhood for me to get distribution like that, you're going to have some problems.
Yeah.
So this is a very different trend.
Honestly, last quick point on this is like, for the first time in a very long time, we're seeing brand effects with an early technology. And what I mean by that is, if you look at like whatever the major model providers, how much better are they from each other? Like, maybe, a little bit, maybe not. Like, it changes all the time. But you actually see clear leaders if they break out early just because people learn like the household landing, people learn Midjourney, people know OpenAI, et cetera. So these markets are so big, they're growing so fast that like, if you become a leader in your segment, people will just adopt you.
But don't discount, like the early leaders of search were like Excite and Yahoo. And so there's like, this is just to not discourage people
we're
from
still
thinking,
in the early game.
Right. Like it's so early that names that you never heard of existed before Google. And that's going to be really important.
Totally.
It's never the first people.
When we look at mobile, there were big companies built, like Uber and WhatsApp and Instagram and TikTok, but the biggest beneficiaries were Facebook and Google. In AI, do we think it will be different, that sort of the biggest companies in the world in 10 to 20 years from now will have created, after ChatGPT, or will it be similar that?
What's your time frame?
Post 2019, I don't know.
No. How many 10 to 20 years you said?
Oh yeah, sure.
Okay, so we can't know if we're wrong until we do this
Yes.
podcast in 10. Okay. I think this is so boring, but I think it's going to look like what we saw in something like SaaS or cloud, which is the incumbents get bigger, but then there's all of these new categories that we would not have been able to predict. And then there's lots of 10 and 20 and 50 and $100 billion companies that also emerge. And then over time, those will just continue to scale.
So similar to mobile?
And some don't make the transition.
Some will go down on a relative basis because their market wasn't as ripe for agentic kind of workflows. But I think that you can kind of say, maybe this is then for another conversation, is just like, if you have a current system of record that has a set of workflows on it where agents make sense to make that workflow much more powerful, that's a good position to be in. But I bet you that if we look back in 10 or 20 years from now, the vast majority of things agents do don't relate to just those things that we are currently looking at, because there's just so many more fields that are now open. And so all of those use cases, I would favor the disruptor or the insurgent. And then in the today's spaces, I would kind of favor the incumbent on the margin. But the markets are so large that you're going to see kind of growth in all of them.
There's a key attribute across all of those, which is sort of like thought leadership, or like who is really setting the agenda for what people are talking about. And I think that's the thing that really changes. The incumbents become bigger, but nobody wakes up in the morning wondering what they're up to.
Right.
Nobody starts to wonder, well, if they're going to do it, we need to understand it. And that's the shift. And you could think of it in the enterprise space or the business space, like what do the CIOs, who do they wake up thinking about? Yeah. And that was a huge shift that sort of goes under the radar. And in the consumer space, it just like, it becomes I understand, I use ChatGPT at school. I need ChatGPT. Yeah. And there's nothing you could do about it as a company.
Yeah. I think the more provocative question is are there any laggards that will use this to get ahead? And we've seen this in the past, right? Like, will Cisco do something interesting?
Yeah.
Oracle is making some kind of crazy moves. Like, are we going to see those that like missed like social?
No, I think everybody missed Oracle as an example, right?
Yeah.
From,
Totally.
from 3 years to today, like you would not have been like, oh, definitely the next $1 billion
Microsoft
company.
had its moment of like, you didn't know what the future, and then it used cloud and Azure to kind of come back. And so, this actually is an opportunity for laggards that are behind the curve to come back.
Yeah, to the Cisco point, like data centers are sexy. Like it turns out that we're just going to be building out lots of AI factories everywhere. So you're going to get more scale from parts of the stack that we stopped paying. Like Broadcom, like again, people were not
Hawk
Yes.
Tan is going to end up running there. Everybody looked at Jensen and maybe somebody else. So
We'll table the rest for the next
All right,
conversation.
thank you.
thank you so much.
for
Thanks,
coming on.
everyone.